Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek, the Summer of Trek. This is a summer-long reading event created by Vin at Revenant Reads and co-hosted by a whole bunch of a bridge crew of BookTube channels designed to celebrate Star Trek fiction. And I've been making my share of videos because I've loved Star Trek from the beginning. The original series is my series. I was watching it and comparing notes with lots of like-minded science fiction fans while it was unfolding, while the whole drama of the original show was unfolding. And when it was gone, when it was rumored that it was going to be canceled, and then it was canceled, and fans had changed the course of the network's decision once before. They thought maybe they could do it again. They barraged the network with letters imploring them not to cancel the show. Instead of canceling it for low ratings, why not move it out of a killer time slot and into the time slot it once occupied so that its ratings will go back up? Those of you who are maybe interested in prehistory, this was in the days when there were 3 networks. And you're going to have to Google what a network was. We had these cathode ray boxes in our homes called televisions. And 3 networks were beamed into those televisions. That was it. That was all. The dials had all sorts of numbers on them, but you got 3 networks. Maybe if you were lucky, you got a 4th one if you stood there and held the antenna just right. And there was a time period there, or a horrible, hopeful, floating time period where fans actually thought maybe the network would change its mind again. Maybe they could save the show a second time, but it didn't happen. The show went off the air. And even before it did, those original fans were hungry for more episodes than they were getting, more Star Trek than they were getting. That's where fan fiction originated, and that process just continued to explode. Even when an animated show came on, and there was at first a trickle of books, those original fans wanted more. And one of the things that you want about a thing like that when you love it is not just to re-enter its universe, and also not just to tell untold stories. There's a lot of hunger to tell untold stories. We were told that it by the Starfleet technical manual and whatnot, we were told that the Enterprise was one of 12 Constitution-class starships. And it didn't take more than a few episodes of Star Trek before those original fans started asking, well, if Jim Kirk's Enterprise is having so many adventures, who's to say that the other 11 Constitution-class starships aren't also having lots of adventures? Why do we know almost nothing about them? And what would happen if somebody wrote their adventures? What were their crews like? What was the chemistry like? Stories started to crop up along those lines. That was one thing, was to tell untold stories. But another big draw for that Star Trek fan fiction was to tell more adventures of the characters we'd already seen. To expand on the Gorn captain, or Miranda Jones, or Samuel Cogley, attorney at law. The outsized guest characters that Star Trek always managed to bring on. Now, a lot of those outsized guest characters died in the course of their episode. So if you wanted to write about them, you had to write about their past adventures, or write about their adventures with Captain Kirk and his Enterprise from their point of view, as opposed to the point of view in the episode. But some of the guest characters didn't die. Some of the guest characters just sauntered off stage. They had an adventure with the crew, and then they saunter off stage. They could easily make a comeback. Khan is a very prominent example of that. But also the Squire of Gothos. And lots and lots of others. But only one ever actually did make a comeback on the show. And that one was Harcourt Fenton Mudd, Harry Mudd. Who's a kind of a pantaloon-wearing, swashbuckling liar and thief and con man, a lovable rogue, who's played by Roger Carmel, who is a great old ham of stage and screen, a beloved presence, usually, in any performance that he did, any Broadway show, it would be, people would say, well, yeah, I'm getting, $50 a week plus take for this crappy off-Broadway show that's got a couple of good gimmicks in it, maybe one good song. I'm getting what I signed up for. The director's a right royal pain in the ass. But if you're going to ask me why I'm going every day, well, I'm going for Roger. I'm going because he's there, because that's just so much fun. He gets it. He's just so good that you want to be there. No Laurence Olivier, no heirs to be Laurence Olivier, no pretense of great acting, just great theater acting, great showmanship. A great guy, I guess, is the simplest way to put it. If you had asked any of his colleagues over the decades at any of the productions that he was in, that's what they'd have said. They'd have said, well, yeah, I'm going for all of the reasons that I signed in my contract, but I'm really showing up every day for Roger. And he reprised his role as Harry Mudd. We meet Harry Mudd in an early episode called Mudd's Women. That's pretty interesting for a number of reasons, and he's a slightly darker, less buffoonish man. He's more of a dangerous con artist in that episode. And then in the follow-up episode is it's sublime. We meet Harry Mudd, who is in charge of a planet full of lifelike androids, and it's unlike Mudd's Women. That second Harry Mudd episode is done purely for comedy, and is one of the funniest Star Trek episodes. But fans couldn't get enough of this guy. They wanted more Harry Mudd adventures cropped up everywhere. Harry Mudd adventures not starring James Kirk cropped up everywhere, but plenty that did. And one of the earliest Star Trek novels was a novel called Mudd's Angels. It had adaptations of the Harry Mudd episodes, and then an original story that no one had seen, that wasn't adapted from the original episodes or the animated series. But there have been others. There have been other novels, and I read one of those last night. I read Mud in Your Eye by Jerry Oldham, which I don't think I'd ever read this before. I think this was, does it have a number? 81. Yeah, this is Star Trek novel number 81. By this point, Star Trek was back in a big way. It was everywhere, so I didn't feel quite the same abiding hunger to read everything Star Trek at this point. So if I read this, I mainly skimmed it. I didn't remember it at all. When I read it last night, it wasn't ringing any bells at all. And this is the story of two planets in a binary star system, both of which are stable, and they're near each other, astronomically speaking. They are Prastor and Distrel. And they have been at war with each other for 12,000 years. Mainly boarding people, landing people, and fighting hand to hand. They aren't nuking each other. They don't have the technology to really destroy each other's planets. And as the narrative of this book tells us, that's the only way that makes sense. It's the only way that you could prolong a war so long. Interstellar war like that would be too costly. You wouldn't be able to do it for that long. And an uneven match, a match between a technologically advanced civilization on one planet and a primitive planet on the other, would also not last very long. These two are just like their stars, and like their planets orbiting around their stars. The physics of a planet orbiting a binary star, much less two planets, that are both M-class, completely habitable by Earth-like beings, is the physics of that situation is mind-bogglingly complex. Fortunately, it's not done in this book. The author doesn't bring it up. Considering how the author handles some other questions in this book, I'm kind of grateful about that. But at the beginning of this book, Kirk is in the middle of officiating over a wedding. He is marrying two of his crew on the Enterprise, and the scene is done for comedy and done fairly well. It strikes the tone that you want in a Harry Mudd novel. A Harry Mudd novel will not be serious, despite the tone of Mudd's Women. It won't be serious, and it isn't serious here. Kirk is officiating at this wedding when he gets a call from a Starfleet admiral, and he he says, he tells Uhura, "I'll take the call in a minute." He marries the crewman. Then he goes to take the call. Like innumerable Star Trek novels that I have read in 3 years of book trek, this one starts with Kirk getting a high priority message from an admiral. That's the thing that kicks the plot into motion, is that Kirk is being told, go and do the plot. I don't really mind. I mean, it's the nature of Star Trek, so I don't really mind. But it's when you're doing an event like book trek and you're reading lots of Star Trek, you start to notice how often that's done. And when I was reading this the first time, if I read this the first time, I don't know when, this probably came out 40 years ago. If I read this the first time, I was mainly going for the comedy. I was mainly looking for any echoes of, Harcourt, Fenton, Mudd. I think of Mudd's wife, the android version of Mudd's wife, or any. This would obviously have been a sequel to the fun episode of Star Trek in which the crew abandons Harry Mudd on a planet full of androids designed to keep him in line. So there had to be a sequel to that, and I think if I ever read this originally, I read it with that in mind. I read it looking for just those little Easter eggs and not really paying attention to the rest of the book. I paid attention this time around, and I wish I hadn't. It's good fun. It's good fun. Jim Kirk is ordered by this admiral to go and investigate why Prastor and Distrel have, after 12,000 years, finally signed a peace treaty. Kirk is dumbfounded at first. He says, wait a minute, you want me to investigate something went well? You want me to investigate a peace treaty? Not the breaking down of a peace treaty, but a peace treaty. She does. Starfleet wants him to go and figure out what's going on here. Why did they suddenly stop fighting? It's a weird assignment. It's not an assignment that Starfleet would ever actually give to the captain of the flagship of the Federation, but nevertheless, you swallow it and you watch as Kirk goes to these planets and makes contact with them and quickly comes to realize that they have achieved peace between them for the first time in 12,000 years with the help of their beloved benefactor, Harry Mudd, who has somehow managed to finagle himself into a revered position as a diplomat and peacemaker on this world. Now, these people on these two planets don't know Harry Mudd, but we do. The reader does. And the author here does a really good job of playing on that knowledge, of making you smile at how unaware they are of this portly serpent that they have let into the Garden of Eden. They don't know what they're doing, but we do. And so does the Enterprise crew. And this author does that well. That part I enjoyed, but oh my. This is, first of all, it's stretched on the rack. This is a short story. At most, this is a short story. A 30-page short story, this would probably have been very good. And it made me think, once again, about Star Trek anthologies. A Star Trek anthology every year. Not necessarily the Strange New Worlds anthology that I've already touched on here in the Summer of Trek. Not necessarily those. Those are... I wonder what it would be like to take a lot of the basic premises of a lot of these Star Trek novels and boil them down to the 30-page short story that they obviously should have been. I wonder if that wouldn't make for just a string of really great 30-page short stories. This is not a novel. There isn't enough here. The author seems to realize that around the 90-page mark. He starts chucking in MacGuffin after MacGuffin, but take it from me. The MacGuffins have to be there at the beginning. If you're a writer and you're pounding away on your typewriter and you're getting to page 90 and you're realizing, this thing, to quote Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, I never thought this thing would go the distance. If you get to page 90 and you realize, I don't have enough stew for the crew here, then you start chucking in MacGuffins, that is never going to work. Just take it from me. That is never going to work. I imagine that he had no choice, the author, and I imagine that pocketbooks didn't care, didn't look twice. As long as you're not marrying Kirk to a man, or catching Kirk in bed with a boy, or killing someone, then you can go ahead and do it. We've got the cover already made. We've got this already on the budget. Might as well go ahead and do it. That was really noticeable about this, is that there just isn't enough. There isn't enough avocado spread for the bread. But also there were a whole bunch of other little things that bothered me. Mudd is perfectly in character here. And so is Kirk. And mainly Uhura. Uhura gets a really good amount of time in the spotlight here. Scotty is one-dimensional here. McCoy is largely one-dimensional here. It's really Kirk and the dynamic between Kirk and Mudd, which is a really good dynamic when it's done well. Because as Mudd has to point out to Jim Kirk a couple of times in this novel, he's not Starfleet. Starfleet might have the prime directive, but Harry Mudd does not. And is not under any obligation to follow any of Starfleet's rules. Starfleet isn't a dictatorship. It's part of the Federation, but Harry Mudd doesn't even need to follow Federation rules unless he's in Federation space. It wasn't that so much as it was little things here and there, and they started to pile up pretty quick. The two crewmates that Kirk is marrying at the beginning of the book talk in extremely anachronistic ways that made sense for the 1990s, I'm assuming is when this thing came out, but they don't make any sense for Kirk's time period. And also, as long as we're nitpicking, Kirk gets this call from an admiral. He eventually takes the call, and the author here makes a point over and over again of mentioning the admiral shuffling papers on her desk. She wouldn't have papers on her desk. She wouldn't have briefing papers. She'd have a briefing slate or a computer screen or something like that. She wouldn't have briefing papers. And again, while we're nitpicking, she tells Kirk, I want you to take the Enterprise and investigate why these two people are suddenly at peace after 12,000 years. And Kirk says, well, if that's the job, if that's the mission, then of course I'll do it. I'm finished marrying my crewman, so I'm free to go. And she tells him, good. Proceed immediately. I've already informed your navigator of the coordinates. And I must have blown right over. If I ever read this the first time, I must have blown right over it. I read it this time, and out loud on the bed in the little book room, I said, not without committing mutiny, you didn't. What on earth? Jerry, what on earth? You're saying that an admiral independently contacted the navigator of a starship captain's crew and told them where they're going? No, she didn't. No, she didn't do that at all. No, she contacted the captain, and he gave instructions maybe to his XO, and his XO gave instructions to the navigator, or this being Jim Kirk and him being particularly hands-on, he told the navigator. Starfleet Admiral? No, not unless she's commandeering the vessel. And so on and so forth. I mean, a lot of Mr. Spock's behavior later on in the book. It's fine in the broad stroke, but in the little details, almost all the little details in here rub me wrong, except for Harry Mudd himself. So I'm afraid it's another substandard Star Trek read for Book Trek. I thought this was only so-so. Maybe what I need to do here is move away from the original series. I don't know if that's the thread here or what. Maybe that's Book Trek's way of telling me that I should finish out June by reading other things. So I'm trying not to make a plan out of any of my reading for Book Trek, but I'm thinking that for the rest of the month I will not read any original series, and of course no Deep Space Nine. The Curse of Deep Space Nine is unbroken, but that leaves plenty of other Star Trek to read. I think I'll probably do that for the next 4 days or 3 days, or however long June has left in it. So we'll hope for better tomorrow. I will spin the wheel again tonight, put a Star Trek book on the pile, and I will report back tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.